Okay, so this is a book called Nothing by Jenny Teller, Jean Teller. You can see it up here. And it's called Nothing. We're on chapter 5. Here's chapter 1. We can do a quick recap. Quick summary. Alright, chapter 1. Nothing matters. I have known that for a long time. So nothing is worth doing. I just realized that. Nothing matters. From the moment you are born, you start to die. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. You'll live to be a maximum of 100. Life isn't worth the bother. Says Pierre Anton. When he decides that there is no meaning to life, leaves the classroom, climbs a plum tree, and stays there. His friends and classmates cannot get him to come down. Not even by pelting him with rocks. So to prove to him that there is meaning to life, and that's where we are. Actually, there's spoilers right here. So that's the introduction. Pierre Anton stands up in class one day and says, nothing matters. I've known this for a long time. So nothing is worth doing. I just realized that. And he stands up and it's the first day back to school for these little 6th graders. I think this is set in like Norway or something, and the grades are different. So they're all actually like 13 to 14 or 15, I think. 13 to 15, I think, is the age range in the characters. I read this when I was like 10. So anyways, Pierre Anton stands up in class, says that existential shit and the nihilism and whatever else you guys want to say. And then he climbs in a plum tree outside of his house and he stays there. And when the kids walk by to go to school, he yells at them and and when the when the plums are ripe, he starts throwing plums at them and like yelling, "Why are you going to school? You're just gonna die anyways. Why don't you get used to doing nothing like me?" And they get really mad at him because they're gonna be somebody and they're gonna do something. So they want to get him to stop. They want him out of this tree. They want him to stop yelling at them and saying that nothing means anything. They won't go to the teachers. They won't go to their parents because they feel like Pierre Anton has a point. They're like, if we go to the teachers and tell them that Pierre Anton told us that nothing means anything and we're all pretending that it means something, the adults are going to be like, oh shit, they know. We can't deal with these children. They know too much. So they try to deal with it themselves. Their first plan was to throw rocks at him. And that worked for, like, one time. Eventually, they all got together and they threw rocks at him in the tree. And one of them did hit him, and he fell out of the tree and went home. But he came back, like, the next day. So they have another meeting, and they're like, what the fuck can we do to get him out of this tree? And finally, Sophie, one of the kids, says, we have to prove to Pierre Anton that something matters, was all she said. We have to prove to him that something matters. That was all she said, yet it was plenty, for we all knew right away what we had to do. We set out the very next day. And that's where we are. Chapter 5. Sophie lived at exactly the point where Taring stopped being town and became countryside. Behind the yellow-washed house where Sophie lived with her parents was a large field with an abandoned sawmill at one end. The sawmill wasn't used for anything anymore, and was to be torn down to make room for a recreation facility the town dignitaries had been talking about for years. Even so, nobody really counted on that recreation facility. And although the sawmill had gradually fallen into disrepair, with broken windows and holes in the roof, it was still there and was exactly what we needed. At lunch recess, we all handed over our 1 and 2 and 5 kroner coins to Jan Johan, who ran the entire way to the hardware store, made our purchase, and ran all the way back again, clutching a brand new combination padlock. There was some discussion about what code to choose, since everyone thought their own birthday provided the most suitable combination of figures. Since everyone thought their own birthday provided the most suitable combination of figures, eventually we agreed on the 5th of February, it being the day of Pierre Anton's birth. 502 were the numbers we all concentrated on committing to memory. Sweden? Okay. This is set in Sweden. Yeah. "502 were the numbers we concentrated on committing to memory. So much so that we forgot about our homework and about paying attention in class. Mr. Eskildsen started growing suspicious and asked if our heads were full of sparrows or whether we'd just lost whatever little it was that we had attached to our necks. We didn't reply. Not one of us. 502. We had the sawmill. We had the lock. And we knew what we had to do. Nevertheless, it was a lot harder than we reckoned. With Pierre Anton being in some way right about nothing mattering, it was no easy thing to start collecting something that did. Thank you, Skyon66, for 16 months and 16 months in a row. Bless you. I'm out of beer. I'll be right back. Don't look at my ass. All right. With Pierre Anton being right in some way about nothing mattering, it was no easy thing to start collecting something that did. Again, it was Sophie who saved the day. "We just play along with the idea," she said, and gradually we all found our own ploys to help us. 502. And gradually we all found our own ploys to help us. Elise remembered when she was 6 and had cried when an Alsatian dog had bitten the head off of her doll. So she dug out the old doll and its chewed off head from the boxes in her basement and brought them along with her to the sawmill. Holy Carl brought an old hymn book that was missing its front and back and quite a number of its hymns, but nevertheless ran with no other defects from page 27 to 389. Ursula Marie, my best friend, or the girl I wish that I could be like. Ursula Marie. My name's Agnes, by the way. Ursula Marie delivered a pink ivory comb, missing 2 teeth, and Jan Johann chipped in with a Beatles tape that had lost all sound, but that he had never had the heart to throw out. Others went from house to house, asking if they could have anything that meant something. 1 or 2 doors were slammed in our faces, but we were also given the most wondrous things. The old folk were the best. They gave us china dogs that could nod their heads and were only slightly chipped. Photographs of parents long since dead, or the toys of children long since departed into adulthood. We were given clothes that had been treasured and worn to threads, and even a single rose from a bridal bouquet. 36 years old. The rose, however, made us girls somewhat faint-hearted, because it was really something that we felt mattered. The white bridal dream with the wedding bouquet and the kiss from the man who was ours forever. But then Laura said that the lady who had given it to us had gotten divorced only 5 years later. And since many of our own parents were also divorced, if indeed they had ever been married at all, that dream clearly wasn't worth our time. The heap grew and grew. In just a few days, it grew almost as tall as little Ingrid. Nevertheless, it was still short on meaning. We all knew that none of what we had collected really mattered to us. Really. So how are we supposed to convince Pierre Anton that it did? He was going to see right through us. Squat, zilch, nothing. Again, Jan Johann called us together, and it wasn't long before we had to admit that certain things did matter to us, even if it wasn't much, and even if they weren't all that important. Still, it was a better take than the one we had. Dennis was first. He brought a whole stack of Dungeons and Dragons books he had read over and over, and almost learned by heart. Otto, however, soon discovered that 4 of the series were missing, and he said that Dennis was going to have to give them up too. Dennis blew up and told Otto to mind his own business, and that we all knew that wasn't part of the scheme. And we were so mean, all of us. But the more Dennis yelled, the more the rest of us maintained that the books plainly mattered a whole lot to him. And hadn't we just agreed that it was the things that meant the most to us that we would go on to heap, that would blah, blah, blah. Hadn't we just agreed that it was the things that meant the most to us that had to go on the heap if it was to ever convince Pierre Anton to climb out of his tree? When Dennis had first handed over the last 4 of his Dungeons and Dragons books, it was as if the meaning started to take off. Dennis knew how fond Sebastian was of his fishing rod. And Sebastian knew that Richard had a thing about his black soccer ball. And Richard had noticed how Laura always wore the same African parrot earrings. We should have stopped even before it got this far. Now it was somehow too late, even though I did what I could. This isn't going to work, I said. Ha! Gerda scoffed, and she was pointing at my green wedge sandals that I'd spent all summer persuading my mom to buy me, and that she'd only just gotten me recently for half the price in sales. I knew it was going to come, and to be honest, that was probably why I tried to stop the whole affair. It would only be a matter of time before someone got around to my sandals. The fact that it was giggling Gerda, little bye baby bumpkin, only made things worse. At first I tried to pass it off, as if I hadn't even noticed what she was pointing at. But Laura wasn't letting me off the hook. The sandals, Agnes, she said. And there was no way out. I squatted down and was about to untie them, but then I couldn't get myself to do it, and stood up again. I can't, I said. My mom's going to ask where they are, and the grown-ups are going to figure the whole thing out. I thought I was smart, but I wasn't. You think you're any better than the rest of us? Cried Sebastian. What do you suppose my dad's going to think I've done with my fishing rod? And as if to underline his words, he grabbed hold of the line and fish hook that dangled from the heap. And what have I done with my books? And where's my soccer ball? And my earrings? I'd lost, and I knew it. All I could do was ask for a few days' respite. Just until summer's over. There was no mercy. Even if they did let me borrow a pair of sneakers from Sophie, so I wouldn't have to walk home barefoot. Sophie's sneakers were too small. They pinched at my big toe. And the way home from the sawmill was a whole lot longer than usual. I was crying as I turned into the street and walked the last part of the way up to the house alone. I didn't go in, but sat down in the bike shed, where I could be seen neither from the street nor the house. I pulled Sophie's sneakers off of my feet and kicked them into a corner. The image of my green wedge sandals on top of the heap of meaning wouldn't go away. I looked down at my bare feet and decided Gerda was going to pay.